Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Kifaya Diet Podcast, another podcast episode in English because I'm interviewing Carolyn Costin. She's an expert in eating disorder recovery. She's a therapist. She recovered from an eating disorder herself. She's the reason why I'm certified in eating disorder recovery coaching thanks to the Carolyn Costin Institute. I've learned from her directly, as a certification requires direct supervision with Carolyn. Carolyn is also the author of several books, including the 8 Keys to Recovery workbook. This book was mentioned several times in the episode, and I really recommend it, especially if you are trying to recover and you are unable to work with a coach or a therapist certified in eating disorder recovery. The other books that were mentioned that would be really helpful if you're trying to help someone with an eating disorder. Actually, I don't have it in front of me, but is My Dieting Daughter. That's an excellent book. The other books are the Eating Disorder Source book. There's the 100 Questions and Answers book. There's the 8 Keys to Recovery also. So not just the workbook. And the one actually that I'm reading right now is Yoga and Eating Disorders. So there are plenty of books and they are really helpful and useful if you're trying to recover or supporting someone who's trying to recover. A recommendation that I've heard Carolyn say is that if you have someone in your life that you know would benefit from reading one of those books, and if you're a parent, for example, don't give them the book yourself. See if you can have someone else give it to them, such as like their best friend, and they're more likely to, let's say, accept it and start reading it. So I will stop talking now and go ahead and let you listen to the interview with Carolyn.
You're the one who has to edit it, not me.
Yes, exactly. Okay, Carolyn, thank you so much for your time. I'm so excited to talk to you, as always. And I really appreciate that you're giving us your time so that we can all benefit and gain from your wisdom and your insight and all your years of experience. And what I'm thinking for our interview today is to break it down into like 3 parts. And like the first part would be learning about you, learning about your journey. And the second part to focus on the keys to recovery. And I know we've got the 8 keys and I recommend people get the books, but maybe like hone in on the 3 that you've mentioned several times. I guess maybe they're not they're specifically the 8 keys, but there's the 3 things that recovered people do, because I really want people who are listening to really take something that they can apply straight away. So like focus in on those. And I'm sure the other keys will come up in our chat today. And then I've also asked my community and some of my clients what they want to ask you. So I've got some of their questions and hopefully we'll get to that towards the end. How does that sound?
Great. Okay.
All right. Okay, perfect. So can you start off by telling us about yourself and about your journey from having an eating disorder to recovery to where you are today?
Well, that's too long of a story. I'll do my best to some snippets because, I'm already 70 now, so it's been a long journey, but I struggled with an eating disorder when I was a young teenager. And, that was at the time where they used to take people and put them in hospital programs in America, psych hospitals, and I never did do anything like that. I ended up getting better through a variety of things of my own, including kind of a spiritual soul quest, on that we have a soul and it's more important than our physical shape. And that helped me a lot. But I became a teacher, then I became a therapist, and I didn't really expect to specialize in this, but people who knew I had recovered myself started referring me clients. Got my license in 1979. And so people started referring people to me saying, she has that thing you had. And I started treating them using the things that I used for myself to get better. And then I've just years made a name for myself and ran hospital programs until I realized, hospital is not a place that I would have wanted to be. And so I opened residential treatment in the United States, in houses where there's a chef that comes in, and there's yoga and meditation and, lots of therapy. And it was just a whole different kind of program. That was Montanito. And I sold Montanito in 2016, I think it was. And decided that I wanted to fill another gap in the field, which existed, which was there weren't eating disorder coaches being trained. There's life coaches and sober coaches. And I just thought, leadership coaches. And I just thought, why are there no eating disorder coaches? And the reason is because it's hard, because the training, as you know, has to be quite rigorous. Because a lot of people are suspicious that if you've had an eating disorder, how do you know when you're well enough to treat somebody else and you're not going to relapse? But I know there are people out there working in eating disorder treatment field who had an eating disorder, have lived experience, and have no training because they're afraid to even share it. So I went on to the Carolyn Costin Institute. And now what I do is train eating disorder recovery coaches. That's the quick version.
Amazing. You did an excellent job. So how did your personal experience shape your approach to treatment?
I think one of the main things, and I was thinking about this morning for a different reason. I was thinking about, actually, I was thinking, why does so much treatment not work? And I have had very good success as a therapist and as a clinical director. And why am I so successful? And I think partly shaped by my own experience. I know you have to be collaborative with patients. You have to meet them where they are, help them to take small steps. And what happens, I think, too much in treatment programs is we do things to people. And their whole personality kind of goes underground and they deal with it while they're forced to in treatment, but the internal shift hasn't happened. And I think we have to be more collaborative. I think we have to, once we get people in treatment, sometimes I think it's like, okay, you have to gain 2 pounds a week. You have to eat this food. You have to do this. And we become dictators of the treatment as opposed to collaborators of the treatment. And you can make anybody do anything while you have them sort of captivated in a treatment program. It's really, what about long term? And we see too many people going into treatment programs and relapsing when they come out. And I think a big part of that is because we're not collaborating. So, and I think I knew that from my experience,
Yeah. And I've heard you mention that, you were more of a coach with clients as opposed to a therapist, because that approach
Yeah, good point. I think I always was more of a coach-like person, more of a teacher-like person. I was a teacher for several years. So when I became an eating disorder therapist, I think, and you tell me what you think about this, I think as eating disorder therapists or coaches, we have to be teaching, educating, helping. We have to be working on the how. And I think what happens in therapy too often is you get stuck on the why, trying to figure out why the person got the illness. And at some point, even if you figure out the why, that's not going to help the person get better. So a person might say, well, I know I had an eating disorder because I had this or that trauma in my life and I moved around different places, or I had this childhood of bullying, but how is that going to stop me from binging and purging tonight? How's that going to help me add, starches to my meal, which I've been afraid of? So I was always a how-to person, behavioral steps, how to get better. And I think it only made sense that then that went into, when I opened residential treatment, I had to train therapists on the how. Like I had to hire therapists who came in to work at Montanito, but they'd never sat down and eaten a meal with someone with bulimia or eaten a meal with someone with anorexia. Who trained you to do that? So I had been doing it in my private practice for a long time, having people bring their food, eat together in my office. So I started training therapists how to sit down and talk to people, talk to the eating disorder self and the healthy self, and sit, lean over, sitting at the table with somebody who's struggling with food, put your hand on their shoulder and say, "Oh, you're being beat up right now, aren't you? You're hearing this voice telling you not to eat that. What can you say back?" Those kinds of things. So it kind of made sense to train coaches because I had already trained a lot of therapists and dietitians how to sit with people in a real life situation at a restaurant or at the table or even cooking, because we did that at Montanito. And so it sort of made sense to start training coaches.
From what I hear is that because you focused on the how, because you focused on how to basically nutritionally rehabilitate through the changing of behaviors and the changing of how they think, okay, or how they deal with their eating disorder self, which we will definitely come to, they became healthier physically, and that helped with the therapy part, with the how, or with the emotional side. But if you're focusing on that without actually eating properly or adequately, then there's no way you can deal with the other stuff, because the basic need of food isn't being met.
Well, and because, you still then keep all the anxiety, you still keep all the, if you think about it as a habit, some behavior that's become incredibly habitual, it sometimes doesn't even make sense anymore to talk about what triggers the behavior. Let's say someone is an alcoholic and they just get up in the morning and start drinking. They don't have to be triggered. So to look for triggers, the underlying, why do you drink? Well, the person would say, I drink because I'm alcoholic,
Exactly.
So sometimes you have to just be working at changing those. It's like treating somebody who has a phobia of something. And I always thought this, I thought it's so interesting, even when I was running hospital programs, and I had to get out of that pretty soon because I realized it's not the place to get well, because we would take people and we would take them down to the cafeteria and they would be served their food on a tray. And then when they were discharged home, they had to go grocery shopping. They had to do the cooking, the meal prep, they had to do everything themselves, and we would discharge them from a hospital. And then what? They're totally lost. So in residential treatment, we did all of that, shopping and cooking with them and all that. And then now coaches do those kinds of things with clients. They either virtually or they go to their house and say, let's cook some food for the week, so you have it here. Let's go grocery shopping together. I'll help put a grocery shopping list together. Some coaches are even virtually, on their Zoom accounts, the client has them with their phone going into the store, to buy food. Because when you need support is in the moment. You can go into an office and talk about your problems, but when you need that support is often in the moment, where your eating disorder voice is so strong and you can't fight it. And you just text a coach and get some supportive statement back, or get them online and get you through the moment. And we're seeing real success with the coaching.
Yes. And thankfully, I'm seeing that too. Thanks for the training I got with the CCI and you personally.
It's not easy, like the training is, it's rigorous, and it's important that there's a foundation and there's a structure to follow with the APs, and there's the supervision part. I just like to reiterate to people that it's not like a 2-week course,
Yeah, exactly. Definitely not.
You deserve to be certified if you go through it.
Yes. So before we get into like the 3 things or the main things that people would need to do in order to be recovered, or recovered people do, let's define what it means to be fully recovered. And also, if you can share, how the concept of being fully recovered is relatively new.
Well, it doesn't feel new to me because I've been fighting for it since the 1970s. Uh, but it keeps being revived in different ways because so in the beginning I recovered and I just started treating everybody as though they could be recovered also. And recovered, it wasn't until I think 2006 that I actually came up with a definition in my book, 100 Questions and Answers, about eating disorders. And then it's also in the Eight Keys books. And I don't have it memorized, but it's really when, food and weight and shape take a proper perspective in your life, and you no longer, use eating disorder behaviors to distract from, deal with, or cope with problems. And you no longer betray your soul to look a certain size, wear a certain shape, or reach a certain number on the scale. And so basically, you put things in perspective. It's not about, I don't say anything about getting to a certain weight. I don't say anything. It's all about acceptance of your natural weight and shape that is being recovered, not using the behaviors to cope with things. And things sort of take this proper perspective in your life. And so it's pretty broad in terms of a definition, but I like to put it up on the wall and or read it to clients and say that's where we're going, And here's are the ways that we get there. And so then I started talking a lot about being recovered, and some people in the early 80s started treating people for eating disorders with a 12-step program. And in that program, you're always recovering because if you're an alcoholic, you cannot drink alcohol because you cannot control yourself. You'll fall off the wagon, you'll relapse. So you are always a recovering alcoholic. You're not recovered. And so a lot of people started treating eating disorders the same way. Well, it kind of looks like an addiction and it sort of acts like an addiction. They started treating it the same way. But I was in my office seeing people and saying, that's not true, because for one thing, you can get alcohol out of your life, but you can't get food out of your life. That doesn't make any sense. What you have to do with an eating disorder is learn how to eat, learn how to manage your relationship with food. You don't just get it out of your life. So in some ways it's harder, right? But it's definitely doable because there was a time before your eating disorder, and you were born with a healthy self, not an eating disorder self. So you strengthen the healthy self and get that person back to where they can have a healthy, proper, natural, I can't think of any other better words. Anyway, relationship with food and their bodies. And then the next thing that happened was the genetic research came up and said, oh, there's some genetic predisposition for developing an eating disorder. And so some people use that to say, well, then you always have it because it's in your genes. But that's a little weird, because that's just like saying, just because, yeah, I admit I have those genes that make me a bit anxious. I tend to have an anxious temperament. But that doesn't mean I always have the eating disorder. Now I don't use that anxious temperament in counting my calories or weighing my food. So we take people's temperament or their genetic predisposition, and we figure out, how do you use your basic traits as assets versus liabilities. And so I still don't think the genetic predisposition shows that you always have it. Like when I recovered, my genes stayed the same, but my behaviors changed,
Okay, so if we're going to now look at what recovered people usually do, what are the things that are common that since recovered people do them, that means that if you do them, it will increase your chances of recovery. Go ahead.
It's so interesting you asked me this question, because people often, I've written about this, but people often bypass this for all the other stuff I've written. But this simple thing is so interesting, because I put out a survey about 15 years into my private practice, and I contacted all the clients that I had ever seen and had them answer a bunch of questions. And I didn't know what was going to come back. But the people who were recovered all did three things. They all journaled, and they continued to, when they were working to get better, they continued to journal, a lot of them, after they were recovered. But during this part of really trying to make their recovery solid, they would continue to answer back if that eating disorder voice came up. They would continue to challenge it. They would continue to write things out and really concretize. So that was interesting. The second thing is they had stopped weighing. They had just completely stopped weighing themselves. Even though I weaned them off the scale in treatment with me, you don't know if people are going to go back to that or not. And some people do. And it always has been an issue in my practice. And over the 45 years or so I've been treating people, I have never seen weighing somebody weigh and have it be useful. I just don't see it. I know that there's CBT does it, and FBT, they have you weigh because they say, well, you have to get used to it someday, and you shouldn't have that be a phobia. You got to get used to the numbers. And I say, what for? What? I haven't known a number attached to my body in how many years? What do you need a number for? If you go to the doctor, take my blood, take my urine, listen to my heart, you don't need a number. So that, and then the third thing was reaching out to someone as soon as you feel like a slip or a relapse, or like you're going to engage in a behavior or a profound feeling of anxiety or whatever. Don't sit with it. Know that we're not alone in this. Find your peeps that you can reach out to, and reach out at the first sign. And those three things catapulted these people into this state where they felt like, I did all those things and I'm recovered, and I would still use those as tools if I needed help with something. So that was an interesting thing. So then I started telling everybody I've seen after that survey, that initial survey, said, here's three things you got to do, because if everybody who's recovered did those, that means something.
Yep. And I love it because it's stuff that would be great if you have a therapist. It's great if you're working with a coach, because the coach would be the person you will be reaching out to. The coach could be, playing the role of the eating disorder or the healthy self, so you can do the practice. The coach can, help you when you have that urge to weigh yourself. But it's also stuff that you can get someone else to do. It's not going to be, something that someone who would be like, who could listen to a podcast like this and read a book and then support you also.
Yeah. It's not dependent on others, really. I mean, the reaching out part is, but you can find people to reach out to. If you don't have anybody to reach out to, then that becomes your work. If that's the missing link,
Yes. And so we've mentioned several times eating disorder self and healthy self. And I'd love if you can just explain that as quickly as possible. And then I think we'd have some time to answer some questions.
Okay. Well, this concept came to me when I had my own eating disorder back in the mid 1970s. I tell this story a lot, but I was riding in the car with people to a Christmas party. And I was telling myself, I'm going to go into this party and I'm not going to eat one thing, not going to take one bite of a cookie, nothing. I was gearing myself up for my restriction and my self-discipline. And another voice said to me, that's easy for you. You can go into that party and pass up everything. Look at you. You pass up things all the time. What would be hard for you is to eat a few things and be okay with it. And I was like, who's talking? And I had a little dialogue in my head with myself, and I realized, that is what a healthy person would do. That is my healthy self that I would tell my friend, my sister to do. Why is it hard for me to listen to that myself? Now, I wasn't a therapist at this time. I wasn't even studying to be a therapist. But when I became a therapist and started treating people, I remembered that. And I started asking them, do you have this voice that tells you other things? Is there a part of you that wants to do this and a part of you that's scared? A part of you that came into the session wants to get rid of it. but the part that binged last night still wants to keep going. So you have to deal with, this isn't between me and you, it's between you and you.
Yeah.
That's how you're going to get. And so that's how the whole concept was originally developed. And then over the years, I have just found it to be so incredibly important in helping people realize, because you will hear, it's more powerful than me. My eating disorder made me throw out my dinner last night. I go, no, no, no. You threw out your dinner. A part of you threw out your dinner. Your eating disorder self threw out the dinner. That's a part of you. And the eating disorder can't be more powerful than you are because you give it its power. When you really teach people this, they realize they can get better.
Yes.
They can do it because it cannot be stronger than they are. And I think that's so big. And it gets confused because there is this externalization of eating disorders in narrative work, and that happens a lot with CBT and FBT, where you put the eating disorder outside, but you kind of yell, get out of my life. I hate you. You're awful. I want to get rid of you. And that's not my concept. My concept is, I want to understand you. I want to know why you're here so I can do for you what you've been doing for me in a destructive way. I want to accept that you're there for a reason. So I want to integrate you back into my core, healthy, soul, vibrant self, but not using those behaviors, because we'll figure out other behaviors to take care of things. And that's about integrating rather than getting rid of. Really reduces the resistance when you're dealing with clients. Because I know for me, when people said, oh, there's this thing, we have to get rid of it. And they tried to help me, and I thought, get rid of it. It's me. And so I don't tell people we're getting rid of that. We're going to teach it to behave.
Yes.
We're going to teach it to use
put it in its place.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for explaining that. So, like I mentioned before, I asked some of my community on Instagram, and I asked some of my clients. So I've got some questions, really great questions, definitely frequently asked questions.
Oh, no.
No, there aren't that many.
Okay.
We should have time. So the first one, which we want to start with, is, where do I start? What's the first thing I need to do?
I think the first thing is understanding and having a reckoning that you have two parts. The part of you that's doing the behavior, whatever the behavior is, and the part of you that wants to stop. I think that's primary. Do you recognize that you have those two parts? And even if you need to start with writing a few statements like, I can't eat this food because I'm already too fat. I have to throw up this pasta because I should never have eaten it in the first place. I'm not allowed to have cookies because they will make me gain weight. Whatever the sentences are that come, start with sentences. Write down a few of those sentences, and then take a break from it. And then go back and sit down and write, how would you respond to that if your daughter came and said that to you? How would you respond to that if your best friend came and said that to you? That's a really good way to enter into the world of, oh yeah, I have a healthy self in there. It's just not coming out for me. It comes out for others, but it doesn't come out for me. I think that's a good start. And if you don't have team and you're kind of on your own in this, I wrote the 8 Keys book for people as a self-help book. And I was a little worried about it in the beginning, going self-help for eating disorders. But there have been a lot of people who have gone through those books on their own. I mean, it's better to have someone to share with, but who have gotten a lot out of it. So I would say that's what I just said about the eating disorder self and making the statements. There are a lot of those in that book and the workbook that goes with it, that if you're really diligent and if you really want to get over this, I think you can make some pretty good leaps by going through those books.
Yes, 100%. And I see it with clients who I've worked with, and they are 100% convinced that they want to get better. There's no going back. I'm there to help them get through it, because it's not easy. Like anything else, you when you're doing a big change, having someone to support you will make it easy, or let's say smoother, let's say, or just have someone you can talk to and understand you. But it's not a matter of getting them to the other side. It's just helping them get there. They're going to get there because they are adamant about it. And if someone like that, they could read the book, apply what's in there, and like you've said before, actually do the assignments in there, actually write them out, not just think about it, actually write it out. They can definitely recover. The books are amazing. They're so thorough. All right. So the second question is, how can I get my subconscious mind to want to recover?
Well, I mean, what I would back into it the other way. I would say, why don't you want to? So I first I would say, what are all the reasons why you don't want to? Because that's where you're going to find out the resistance. You can't make your subconscious mind do anything, but if it's against something, you can start to talk about why is it against it. You can also do the assignment, I want to get better, but because usually there's a but I'm afraid to gain weight, but I don't think people will love me, but I've tried and it didn't work. But find out what all the buts are and then try to take them apart one by one, how you can deal with and ask for help. Here's some of my buts. Here's some of the ways that are in the way. I think that's a good way to begin to turn that around.
And help gets you through that, that contemplation stage where you're not ready yet. You want to, like you've said in the past, you want to, like, I'm here to help you want to recover.
Yeah. That's why I always say you don't have to be motivated to get over your eating disorder to come to me for help, because I think a lot of what I do help people is to get the motivation. I think not being motivated is part of having an eating disorder, because when you have an eating disorder, I always find there's ambivalence about getting better. It's scary. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how to do it. It's not. I've never seen anybody come to me with just gung-ho, so ready to do it that they didn't have any hesitations when we started the work.
Yes.
I think motivation is something that I think it's good to read stories of people who have recovered, because I think that some people think that the people who are recovered, they didn't have that bad of an eating disorder, for example. But there are people who are recovered who had an eating disorder. I've treated people who had an eating disorder for 50 years, someone who was hospitalized 22 times, somebody who was on their deathbed that their pastor came and, did the rites. She's recovered today. So I think that helps too, when you realize that you may think, oh, it's so far, so many years for me. I've tried so many things. And yet there are stories of people who have gotten out of this who were you just can't even believe. And I think that can help in terms of the first key is motivation, patience, and hope. And I think we all need that when we're trying to change something hard. And I think it comes and goes. Our hope, our optimism for getting better, our motivation, and it's hanging in there and seeing if we can find some inspiring people, some people who motivate us, whether it's through real connection or through stories we read.
And keep telling yourself, and this is what I tell my clients, if someone else can do it, you can do it. Just keep reminding yourself that.
Yeah, the genes I don't have are recovery genes. I don't have any magic recovery genes. I had to do the work. And if you do the work, you can do it too.
Yeah, exactly. Another question, can I recover on my own or must I ask for help? We touched upon that, but maybe quickly.
You can't do it on your own. I did not have treatment. Of course, back then, there were very few therapists, no dietitians. Therapists weren't trained in eating disorder. I went to a therapist once and it was an awful experience. He tried to make me drink a soda in front of him to see what I would do. It was so weird. Anyway,
oh, wow.
But he'd never seen anybody with anorexia before. He didn't know what to do. So you have a lot more chance nowadays, getting in touch with someone or having someone help. You don't have to. People do get better. Like we were talking about the 8 Keys book as a guide. You can do it. You'll know if you start down the path and it's too hard, you'll know if you can do it. If you struggle and keep trying and you keep falling back, or you keep staying in the same spot and not progressing, then find someone. And a coach is a nice alternative to uh, uh, a full treatment team. Even though, coaches in the US are supposed to be in, well, coaches were originally designed to work along with a therapy team, but there are some countries where it's very difficult for people to find a
Yes.
therapy team, especially trained in eating disorders. So sometimes coaches are in there doing this work the best they can, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe even hooking up with a support group or something like that is helpful if you feel like you're on
Yeah.
your own out there trying to get better.
Correct. A question that comes up very often is, how can I deal with my fear of weight gain? I keep thinking no matter how much I gain, I will never be able to lose it. So I guess this is someone who's is in recovery and knows they're going to be gaining a lot of weight, and maybe they have extreme hunger, and that's where the fear is coming from.
Yeah, it's really hard to deal with that fear because you almost have to go through it to deal with it. It's kind of like jumping off the diving board into the pool for the first time, or driving a car on your own without your driver trainer guy for the first time. There's no way. Do not wait for all the fear to be gone. There's no magic therapy that's going to eliminate the fear. What happens is, as you go through it, the things you're getting for being recovered, the way you feel about your relationships, being able to go out places that you couldn't go out to before, going on a date, being able to have a meal, feeling like you don't have to hide all these behaviors you're doing. So many things get better that it's kind of a slow trade. It's not like, oh, okay, I'm going to be in therapy till I get rid of my fear and then I'll gain weight. It doesn't happen that way. You have to start eating, you have to start gaining the weight and see how other things balance those things out. And the thing about going back is, look, anybody who's lost a ton of weight with an eating disorder, like if you have anorexia, for example, whoops, my chair, you have that power in your nature. Nobody can stop you if you want to go back and do it again. But I don't know anybody who recovered who said, oh, being sick was better and went back. I don't know anybody, not in 45 years, who said, oh, I liked that better. I'm going to go back. I do know some people who kind of thought they were recovered, wrote about being recovered, but they really weren't. And the reason they weren't is because all they did really was that brutal kind of symptom control, and they never ultimately did the integration. So when something came up in their life that was a stressor, the eating disorder self was there. Oh, I'll take care of this. We know how to deal with this. Just go binge and purge. That distracts you and makes you. They never really integrated those two parts. And I think that's the thing when people say, oh, I was recovered, and people who are recovered can relapse, every single time somebody hasn't done that internal work. In my experience with people.
Yes. What I tell clients is that by the time you've gained some weight or the weight, you've reached your healthy weight, you're going to be a different person.
Yeah.
You're not going to, it's not like where you are now, how you're thinking now, and then with the, an extra 5 or 10 kilos. No, you're going to be a different person. It's going to be a different person who has gained the weight. So you'll be able to handle it in a completely different way. By that time, you would have gained a lot of skills.
This is why I go back to the point of collaboration, because the mistake that's made often is people are put in treatment programs and they gain the weight fast and they gain a lot of it, and their psyche hasn't had time to catch up. So their internal changes are not as fast as these external changes, and they can't handle it. So that's another reason why we see a lot of unsuccessful treatment.
Okay, another question. Can I go back to exercise and eating healthy after I've recovered with the goal of changing my outside appearance? Why is the goal of weight loss considered wrong for someone who had an eating disorder?
This is really fraught with danger. I think a lot of people in the field think that weight loss is wrong for anybody because it's diet culture and nobody should lose weight. But, I think I don't want to put a stigma on anybody telling them what they can or can't do with their body. I don't think that's fair either. The movement for health at every size was about accepting all bodies. But here's how I would say it. I don't think anybody in this world should lose weight just for appearance purposes. I think if somebody wants to get healthy, somebody wants to be fit, somebody wants to exercise, if somebody wants to eat a vegetarian diet, I think we should be accepting of all shapes and sizes and diets and whatever of people, as long as they're not doing those things that I said about being recovered, as long as they're not compromising their health or betraying their soul, losing perspective, dealing with their emotional issues. As long as they're not doing those things, then I say, why should we care? Because sometimes to be healthy, and I'll give an example. My husband had a heart attack and was he had a few problems, but he was put on not a plan really to lose weight, although that's what the doctor said. And my husband was not overweight in any shape, but he had high cholesterol, high blood pressure. Anyway, so what happened is changing his diet to be healthier, the byproduct was that he lost weight. So if you lose weight because you're trying to be healthier, it's different than saying weight loss is the goal. Because if weight loss is the goal, you could just eat oranges all day. It can't really be. Never had a goal for a client for weight loss. And I never want anyone to think you're not acceptable the way you look or the body shape you're in. I think we need to accept everybody, shapes and sizes. But I think if you as an individual have a goal, you want to be fit, you want to eat some kind of healthier, I don't know, you want to do some kind of meal plan you found or something. And there's all types. There's vegetarian and keto and whatever. If you really like that and it makes you happy and you want to do it, but I'm constantly assessing what's the motivation for this. What are you okay if you have a time off on a weekend and you're on a trip? Can you go off of it? If it's a trap, if you identify yourself by it, if you feel anxious or upset, if you can't get your keto meal, if you don't eat because your certain kind of food isn't there, then I think you have to reassess. But I think every human being has a right to. There are people, you do fasting for different religious purposes. There's kosher eating. I don't want to tell somebody how they should eat, but I look at how's it affecting your life? What is the motivation for it? Does it give you an expansive life or does it give you a constricted life? That's a good way to look at it.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. Like, there are people who could be eating in a way that we would consider disordered because if we ate that way, we wouldn't be happy. But they're fine. They're eating that way and they're fine with it. It's not affecting their life. They have some flexibility. Their values are not being affected. Their quality of life is not being affected.
And
then
it's
fine.
It's not their most important thing. When I had anorexia, the most important thing was how much did I eat today? How little did I eat today? Really, am I breaking my rules? That was the primary driving force. Even though I was still doing good grades and stuff like that, it ruled me so much. It would make or break my day. So whenever your eating plan becomes all about identifying who you are, and we get overly identified with our meals, then that's not healthy. It's not in balance.
Yeah, like the definition of being recovered. When it takes a certain amount of energy. It takes a certain spot in your life, but it doesn't take over your life.
Yeah.
It doesn't consume you.
Yeah. You put it in, it's in perspective.
In its place.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, another question which I get so much is when someone either goes on a very strict diet or has disordered eating or a specific eating disorder, and then they lose their period. And that tends to be a big motivator for girls to recover, to get their period. And they seem, sometimes from the questions, it's like I even had a client that told me honestly afterwards that, we worked together, and then when she got her period, and then very quickly after, she went back because that was the motivator. The motivator was getting her period back. And then once she did, she went back to disordered eating. But, she's trying to control so she doesn't lose her period again. So, for some people, it takes a long time. And for others, they don't even lose their period. So, what do you say when they've been trying to recover for a while and they still haven't gotten their period?
Well, interestingly enough, I mean, we're all different. It's like kids learn to walk at different, and talk at different rates, growing up. We're all different. We all have different biochemistries. It depends on how badly damaged your body was, how much it's trying to protect itself. Your body doesn't want to menstruate because if your body thinks we're not, here's paraphrasing, the body saying, I don't know if this human being can carry a baby to term. I don't know if this human being is healthy enough. So we're just going to stop the ovulation process and stop the menstruation because this person has to be healthy enough to carry a baby to term. That's like a natural phenomenon in nature. So what I have seen is people, and I think here's another problem. Sometimes people who are trying to be well-meaning and helpful say, oh, you need to gain more weight, you need to gain more weight, you need to gain more weight. And then the people can get way above a weight they're at all able to tolerate, and then they just lose it all. So there are some parameters to look at. One of them is acupuncture, because to get the body to flow in a more natural way, I've had clients who have reached what was a pre-eating disorder determined healthy weight. It's hard for us to know what each of us are supposed to weigh, but back to a weight before they even had an eating disorder, and they still aren't menstruating. I have had people have success going and having acupuncture and even some acupressure. I won't go into it in detail, but if you find someone, a really good person, they know there are certain spots, trigger points on the body that help with blood flow and help particularly in that area. So that's something I would check out. And then there's another thing where you can get an ultrasound of your ovaries, and your ovaries are supposed to be a certain size. And like everything with anorexia, your whole body shrinks, your brain shrinks, so do your ovaries. And if you are more closer to where your normal weight is, the ovaries will be within a normal size. So there are some things you can do medically if you really feel stuck, you really feel like I'm eating well, I've got my weight up, I'm still not menstruating, I would take a look at that. And the last thing I would look at, not last, but the last thing coming to my mind is how much exercise are you doing? Because sometimes if the person's doing, even if they're eating okay, if they're doing too much exercise, the body still feels that fuel is being used to support the exercise. It might not go into ovulation and menstruation.
So they might need to take a break from all exercise if they're really keen on getting their period back.
Well, I don't know if they have to take a break from all, depends on who it is, because some people have a hard time cutting back. But generally, I start with having people cut back. And you're right. It might be that they have to take a break for a while. It could be.
Okay, 2 more questions. How can I love my body and not punish it with junk food every time I get upset?
Well, I would question the term punish it when you get upset. The reason I would question that term is there's another reason why you're going for junk food. My guess is that it seems like it's a treat or things you don't allow yourself because you're calling it junk food. And so, on the one hand, you may think it's a punishment, but on the other hand, you want to do it. Well, let's say a part of you wants those things. So that's not so much a punishment as it is you're giving yourself something that you kind of secretly desire. I don't know who you are, who asked this question, but I would look at the two parts of you, the part that sees it as a punishment and the part that sees it as a desire, because usually those are dueling. And so you have to be able to talk and write out, like we talked about in journaling, write out those two parts of self. And another thing I think maybe start with, instead of loving my body, because people with eating disorders, that's a big leap. It's like leaping to be an intuitive eater. It's why I use conscious eating instead of intuitive eating. Well, I shouldn't go off into that, but being accepting of your body, or being neutral about it, trying to get yourself to love your body can seem like such a far off goal. Can seem like it's so, I mean, I didn't do that. I didn't do that to get better. I just went, I want to be accepted. That's how I started, with acceptance. And there's a whole movement about body neutrality, which means let's just be neutral about our bodies, so that we don't have to do this work where we think we have to love it all the time. If you get to loving it, great. That's great, because it's nice to love this vehicle that houses your soul and everything. It's wonderful when you get there. But really, I would think, why don't you go into trying to do some acceptance? And then it sounds to me like you need to do some writing about why I want to eat this food and why I want to not eat all this food. Why I want to, you can say eat, you can say binge, whatever you want to call it, because you're fighting with those two parts of yourself. And until you get clear about those two parts, it's going to be hard to have your healthy part.
Great. Thank you. Last question.
This question makes me feel like I should do a radio show.
Oh, yes.
Radio show.
Yes. Amazing. Oh, that'd be awesome. Okay. How can I make sure I don't slip back to my eating disorder behaviors or relapse?
I think I do think it helps having someone that you can trust to be accountable to, so that when you do feel it coming on. I think the hard thing is what people do a lot is they say, oh, I'm having thoughts, but they're not that bad, or they're not that many, or I skipped a couple meals, but it's not that much. I think at the first sign of doing any of that, it's so nice to reach out and talk to somebody about it and work through it a bit and say, could you check on me in a couple days and just ask me, did you eat breakfast? Because I've been skipping breakfast, or something like that. I think having someone to help be accountable to is a really good thing in the early phases when you are doing well, but you're worried about slipping back. I used to, when I weaned clients off of seeing me, I would say, okay, now you're going to come every other week. Now you're going to come every 3 weeks. Now you're going to come once a month. So they knew they had some place they were going to report. They were going to show up and report what was going on. So I think when you've taken the training wheels off and are going solo, it's nice to have kind of a place to land, or someone you can land there and sort some things through when you're struggling. That's what I think.
Nice. Definitely. And not have any shame attached to it. That it's okay if there, some urges come back, or some thoughts or behaviors come back. Don't be ashamed to, ask for help and admit that, it's come back and I need help to, get back on track, let's say.
And it happens. That's why I don't train anybody unless they've been recovered for at least 2 years, because during 2 years, a lot can come up and there will be sort of remnants of it hanging around until it's finally integrated, and then it's just gone. Then when it's fully integrated, there's no way it's going to split off again. It doesn't even need to. It doesn't even want to. It's happy to be a part of the whole system. That's what's the beauty about really being recovered is there's no chance that you're going to lose it. I lose track of it, split that part off again. I don't know how to, I'll have to think of a really good analogy, but when it's back together in your core self, it doesn't have a need, and you've acknowledged how to take care of those needs that it was meeting. It doesn't have a need to exist anymore. So there's no reason for it, hopefully that
Excellent.
makes sense.
Yes, that definitely makes sense. And is there anything you feel, we didn't cover, you feel it's important for someone listening? Like I imagine someone listening would be, would either have an eating disorder or know someone who has an eating disorder and they're trying to find a way to help them and support them. Is there something you feel we haven't covered and they need to know about or look into more, let's say?
I guess the only thing I would say is, as you know, I've written several books. So there are a few books that could help in different ways. If you're struggling with this, that I really put out there for people trying to help explain some of these concepts. The 8 Keys thing was specifically a self-help book, but I think there are ways that people get into healing. Like, for example, the Yoga and Eating Disorders book. If you're interested in yoga and you have an eating disorder, I find that can be a useful tool to helping you. The Dieting Daughter book has a lot of stuff in it for parents, and it has a lot of stuff in it for people like with exercise addiction and things like that. So I guess you could go look at the books. The Eating Disorder Source book has a lot of topics for parents to talk about, topics that I use in group therapy that people can get a lot out of. So that's one thing I would say, that there are other avenues and other readings that I put out. If you like what you hear today and you like this philosophy, maybe looking at some of my other books might be helpful.
Definitely. And I'll put links to all the books and to your website if maybe someone's listening and they want to be a coach. Especially, people in the Arab world, we need more coaches in this part of the world.
Yeah.
More coaches in general.
Yeah, it's so true.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited.
Thank you. Really. Thank you so much, Carolyn. You are one of the most generous people I've ever come across. You're so warm. Talking to you, I feel like I've known you forever. And I'll never forget, messaging you and saying, like, before you ever knew me, like, I'm in the area, like, can I meet you? And you're like, yeah, sure, come over. And like, I show up and you hug me, like I've known you.
Why not?
Even though it's the first time we ever met. Yeah, exactly. Why not?
The thing that I think is so important in life is leading with your heart, just lead with your heart, with your heart and soul, really. And that doesn't mean you can't make people be accountable and challenge them and tell them the truth without judgment, but leading with the heart. So I thank you for saying that. I appreciate that kindness.
I appreciate you. And thank you so much again for your time. And I'll definitely want to have you again. So another radio segment, another radio show.
I like that a lot. All right, take care. Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Carolyn. I hope you enjoyed listening to my interview with Carolyn. As I mentioned, I've put down in the show notes the details about the Carolyn Costin Institute and also some links to the books we mentioned during the interview. And I hope you benefited from it, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.